USS Hopping, DE-155, was acting as a high-speed transport and on screening duty off Okinawa near Nakagusuku Bay on 9 April 1945, when at 15:00 the ship came under fire from a Japanese shore battery. Hopping was hit by several shells which struck the hull forward, aft deck, the bridge, and started a fire. Power was knocked out and the ship came to a halt, but her main battery was able to return fire on the enemy gun. After a half-hour of damage control, the fires were put out, and Hopping had power restored and was able to limp away from the area. Luckily, despite the damage, the ship suffered no fatalities, and only a few men were wounded. She was able to return to Ulithi for repairs on 29 April and returned to duty just a couple weeks later. USS Fetchler, DE-157, was escorting a convoy through the western Mediterranean on 5 May 1945, when at approximately 01:20, an incoming torpedo fired by U-967 hit the ship on the starboard side near the engine room. The detonation of the torpedo wrecked the midsection of the ship and knocked out all power. Despite the gallant actions of the crew, controlling the flooding proved to be impossible, and at 01:40 the call to abandon ship went out. The Fetchler broke in two a few minutes later, sinking stern first and followed by the bow. 29 crewmen were killed and 26 others wounded. USS Chase, D-158, was patrolling radar picket duty on 20 May 1945 off Okinawa, when at 16:25, a lone Japanese kamikaze was spotted making a run at the chase. The ship put up a fierce anti-aircraft barrage and shot down the diving suicide plane which hit the water and exploded just 10 yards away from the destroyer Escort. Shrapnel from the plane was sprayed alongside the hull and exposed areas of the ship, causing equipment damage and 12 men to be wounded. A hole was also opened along the hull which flooded a few compartments, but luckily the chase was able to maintain buoyancy and was towed to Kermara-Redo, then later the States. USS Loy D-160 was patrolling off Okinawa on 27 May 1945, when at approximately 13:00 an enemy plane was sighted off her starboard beam heading right at Loy. Anti-aircraft guns began to engage the target as it closed on the ship. Despite the heavy fire, the kamikaze slammed into the ship just after the forward gun turret on the starboard side, causing a terrific explosion that caused substantial damage to the superstructure of the Loy. 21 crew were killed and 30 were wounded by the strike. Prompt damage control was able to save the ship from further destruction, and she was able to make her way out of the combat area under her own power. The ship would not return to action before the end of the war and was eventually scrapped in 1966. USS Little D-26 was escorting a convoy in Leyte Gulf on 7 December 1944, when at approximately 13:00 an incoming strike of several Japanese kamikaze planes was spotted, prompting her crew to man anti-aircraft stations. Although Little assisted splashing 5 attackers, one plane targeted the ship's bridge and successfully made a direct hit, causing a powerful explosion. The bridge and superstructure of the ship were severely damaged and engulfed in flames which spread through several compartments. The damage control teams were able to save the ship from total loss and extinguish the fires. 38 men were lost and another 55 were wounded. Little proceeded to a nearby port for temporary repairs and finally back to the States. The ship rejoined the war on 9 February 1945. USS Foreman, D-633, was on anti-submarine duty near Kermara-Redo on 3 April 1945, when at approximately 11:20, the ship was targeted by several Japanese dive bombers. Despite putting up a fierce anti-aircraft barrage and driving away most of the attacking planes, one plane managed to brave the fire and dropped its, possibly a 250 lb, bomb which struck the ship forward portside near the bridge and main guns, then penetrated several decks before exploding. Several fires broke out, and the ship started to flood due to a large hole in the blown out of the side. Luckily, power was not completely knocked out, and damage control was able to keep the situation from getting out of hand. Fortunately, despite the damage, the foreman suffered no fatalities and just a few wounded. The destroyer Escort was able to get underway under her own power and return to Ulithi. She was back on station off Okinawa on 3 June 1945. USS Whitehurst, D-634, was conducting anti-submarine duty 2 miles off Kermara-Redo on 12 April 1945, when at approximately 14:30, the ship was attacked simultaneously by 3 D-3A Val dive bombers. The 3 enemy planes targeted the Whitehurst from multiple angles, and 2 were shot down by fire from the destroyer Escort. However, the third plane, which had been approaching from the port side, a few feet above the water, veered upwards just before impact to strike the ship's portside forward superstructure. The plane's momentum punched through the pilot house with such force its 500-pound bomb exited the ship to explode in the sea off the ship's starboard side. With her command and control center knocked out, the ship was burning heavily and circling out of control, while the crew fought to contain the fierce fires. Fortunately, the close proximity to Kermara-Redo allowed nearby ships to lend assistance putting out fires on Whitehurst, and the ship was able to reestablish control and make it for temporary repairs. 42 crewmen were killed and another 22 wounded by the kamikaze strike. The Whitehurst was able to make it back to Pearl Harbor under her own power and survived the war to be sunk as a target ship in 1971. Submarine SS USS R-12, SS-89, was training new submariners in conducting a torpedo practice approach off Key West, Florida on 12 June 1943. The sub began to dive, but suddenly the forward battery compartment rapidly began to flood. An order went out to blow main ballast, but it was too late. In less than 15 seconds, R-12 sank to the sea floor. The submarine's captain and 4 other men were washed off the conning tower as the boat sank and were later rescued. A 14-day search yielded no results, and the R-12 was considered lost. 42 men went down with R-12 when she sank. Her wreck was rediscovered in 2011, but the exact cause of her sinking remains a mystery. USS S-26, SS-131, had just finished transiting the Panama Canal on the night of 24 January 1942 with 3 other submarines, and the subchaser PC-460 acting as escort. Once outside the harbor of Balboa, Panama, PC-460 sent a visual message informing the escort was about to turn around and return to port, but unfortunately only S-21 saw the signal. The subchaser turned and violently collided with S-26 starboard amidships, causing the submarine to roll over on its side and sink within a few seconds. Only the captain, executive officer, and a lookout were rescued before the sub plunged beneath the sea. Over 50 rescue attempts were made by divers to reach men trapped inside the submarine, but all failed. Divers reported they could not hear any tapping from inside the hull, making it doubtful anyone survived the initial sinking. 46 men were lost with S-26. USS S-27, SS-132, was on her first and only patrol of the war to reconnoiter Kiska Island in the Aleutians on 19 June 1942. While recharging her engines on the surface in a heavy fog, the crew of the sub did not notice they had drifted 5 miles away from their dead reckoning position. At 00:43, the crew noticed waves breaking against rock just 25 yards forward of the bow and ordered back emergency. But it was too late. Waves smashed the submarine against the rocks and violently rocked the crew around inside. Efforts were made to free the boat off the rocks, but all attempts failed. The crew sent out distress dispatches and began to abandon the sub at 03:30. By 11:00, only a skeleton crew remained on board. The crew set up camp in abandoned buildings at Constantine Harbor and would be rescued in days ahead. S-27 was stripped of all valuable equipment and left abandoned on the rocks where she grounded. Luckily, all of the submarine's crew was saved without serious injury. USS S-28, SS-133, was conducting a training exercise with the USCGC cutter Resilience, WPC-150, on 4 July 1944 off the western coast of Oahu, Hawaii, when at 17:30, S-28 dived to conduct a practice torpedo run 4 miles away from Resilience. The USCGC cutter detected the submarine by sound several times, but the signal got more distant as time went on. By 1820, signal had been completely lost with the sub. Resilience retraced her course trying to re-establish communication with S-28. At no time was a distress signal sent out, nor did S-28 ever indicate there was an issue. At 20:00, the Coast Guard cutter contacted Pearl Harbor for help. A search of the area was undertaken until the afternoon of 6 July when a slick of diesel oil was found. It remains unknown to this day exactly why S-28 sank, but taken down with her were the lives of 49 men. The remains of the sub were discovered in 2017 off the coast of Oahu at a depth of 8,500 feet. USS S-36, SS-141, was proceeding to Surabaya, Java on her second patrol of the war when at 04:04 on 20 January 1942, the sub was transiting through the Makassar Strait and was grounded on the Taka Bakang Reef. The forward battery began to flood and filled with chlorine gas, prompting the commanding officer to call for help. A Dutch launch was dispatched from nearby Makassar City to pick up the crew off S-36. By 13:30, the last man to leave the sub rigged her to flood. Luckily, nobody was killed or seriously wounded by the loss of S-36. USS S-39, SS-144, was on her fifth war patrol heading across the Coral Sea to the Louisiade Archipelago when late on the night of 13 August 1942, the submarine ran aground on rocks just off Rossel Island. Throughout the morning of 14 August, the crew valiantly tried to refloat their sub, but the list only increased as the boat continued to be slammed against rock by the swelling sea. The sub called for help, and soon HMAS Katoomba was dispatched to assist. The entire crew was rescued, and the submarine was abandoned after all sensitive documents had been destroyed. USS S-44, SS-155, was on her fifth patrol of the war the night of 7 October 1943, when at 20:30 the submarine picked up on radar what was presumed to be a small merchant ship. In fact, the small ship was a coastal defense vessel which quickly opened fire on the S-44, prompting the sub to start an emergency dive. But it was too late. The sub was perforated by shells all over, including below the waterline which started to flood the boat. The crew attempted to hoist a white flag of surrender, but the Japanese vessel continued to fire at the S-44. Only 2 men were able to get out of the submarine alive before slipped beneath the waves. The 2 survivors would be forced to work as prisoners in brutal conditions until they were liberated after the war. USS Argonaut, SM-1, was on her third patrol of the war along the southeast coast of New Britain Island, when on 10 January 1943, she intercepted a convoy of enemy ships from Rabaul. A passing by American bomber witnessed Argonaut attack a column of escorting destroyers. The Japanese destroyers Isakaze and Meikaze first depth charged a reported enemy submarine, then noticed a bow popping above the waves and together blasted it with 5-inch, 127 gunfire until it sank. Argonaut took the lives of 105 officers and crew down with her, the worst loss of life for an American sub during the war. USS Shark, SS-174, was on her second patrol of the war near the Philippines in February 1942. The sub had been reporting to Soarabaja and patrolling the Strait of Malacca and was to proceed to cover the passage east of the Bangka Strait. The Shark reported she had been attacked with depth charges about 10 miles off Tifor Island on 2 February, and 5 days later informed base she was hunting a cargo ship heading northwest. This was the last contact ever heard from Shark, as she was never seen again. The Navy presumed the ship was lost on 7 March 1942. Post-war analysis of Japanese records are inconclusive, but it is clear that several attacks on an Allied submarine were made in the area and time frame where Shark was assigned to operate. Because the submarine was ordered to northern Celebes, it is most likely Shark was sunk by the Japanese destroyer Yamakaze during a 10-minute-long gunfight while the sub was surfaced at 01:30 on 11 February 1942 off Minato. Although survivors could be heard in the water, the Japanese destroyer did not bother to rescue anybody. Lost with the Shark were the lives of 54 crew. USS Perch, SS-176, was on her second patrol of the war when on 1 March 1942, when she attacked a Japanese convoy about 30 miles off Surabaya, Java. Two escorting enemy destroyers, the Amatsukaze and Hatsukaze, dropped depth charges on and crippled Perch. The sub surfaced hours later, only for the next day to be further left bordering on the line of sinking by depth charges from the destroyers Ushio and Sazanami. The sub resurfaced at dusk, but found the damage sustained would prevent the sub from diving again. Soon thereafter, Ushio appeared, and the commanding officer decided to scuttle his combat ineffective boat, and all 59 crew members were taken prisoner by the Japanese. 5 men would die during 3.5 years of brutal treatment, but eventually 54 men from the Perch finally made it home. USS Pickerel, SS-177, left Pearl Harbor on 18 March 1943 for her 7th patrol of the war, and arrived to top off fuel and supplies at Midway Island before heading to the northeastern coast of Honshu. The submarine was never heard from again, and was listed as lost on 12 May 1943. Japanese records indicate the only submarine action occurring on 3 April, which was attacked with depth charges from destroyers and a plane, until an oil slick developed. The certainty of this information remains in question, for Japanese records for April 1943 are notoriously inaccurate, and the reported position was out of Pickerel's assigned hunting grounds. It is possible the sub relocated after poor target availability, but the mystery of Pickerel and her 50 crewmen remains unsolved. USS Pompano, SS-181, left Midway Island on 20 August 1943 bound for the coast of Hokkaido and eastern Honshu. The submarine was never heard from again, and presumed lost on 15 October 1943. For many years it was believed the sub was sunk by naval mines off the coast of Honshu. However, recent evidence suggests the sub was sighted in the Shiriasaki Sea and attacked on the surface by a patrol plane on 17 September. Depth charges were later dropped by several sub-hunting craft who observed oil or fuel floating on the water. This report is a mystery, however, as a Japanese cargo ship was attacked by a submarine on 25 September, 8 days later. No other U.S. submarine besides Pompano would have been operating in this area. The exact circumstances which led to loss of Pompano and her 73 crewmen remains unknown to this day. USS Sculpin, SS-191, was on her 9th patrol of the war attempting to disrupt Japanese reinforcement of the Gilbert Islands before the invasion of Tarawa, when in the early morning of 19 November 1943, the submarine attacked a convoy of ships only to be fired on by the Japanese destroyer Yamagumo. Numerous salvos of depth charges damaged the sub enough to force it to the surface and attempt a gun battle, but was no match for the destroyer's main battery. As the crew abandoned ship, Captain John P. Cromwell refused to leave his submarine out of fear he would be tortured by the Japanese into revealing information about the upcoming Tarawa landings. For his sacrifice, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Including the captain, 11 crew went down with the Sculpin, while 41 survivors were picked up by the Yamagumo. One badly wounded man was thrown overboard by the Japanese. The survivors were transported to Japan on board different vessels, one of which was sunk by another U.S. submarine, taking the lives of another 20 more Sculpin crewmen. The surviving 21 men had to work in copper mines for the rest of the war before finally being liberated. USS Swordfish, SS-193, was conducting her 13th patrol of the war off Okinawa in preparation for the upcoming landings scheduled there for 1 April 1945. The sub reported it had received orders to avoid the Nansei-Shoto area on 3 January 1945. This would be the last message ever received from Swordfish, as she never responded or returned to port again. On the morning of 12 January, submarine USS Keat, SS-369, made sonar contact with what they believed was another submarine, and 4 hours later could hear heavy depth charging in the area the sonar contact was made. This incident was regarded by the Navy as the destruction of the Swordfish, and indeed the escort ship CH-4 attacked a submarine near that location. USS Sea Lion, SS-195, was undergoing an overhaul in the Cavite Naval Yard near Manila when on 10 December 1941, the base was attacked by land-based Japanese bombers from Taiwan. The docked submarine was hit by 2 bombs. One hit the sub's conning tower and exploded outside the hull, while the second bomb struck a ballast tank and caused an explosion in the aft engine room which killed 4 men. The ship took on water and settled in the dock, her stern underwater. The damage inflicted to the naval yard made repairs an impossibility, so orders were given to salvage any valuable equipment and destroy the sub. On 25 December, Sea Lion was destroyed by explosives set inside her hull to prevent the Japanese from using her. Another member of her crew would perish in a Japanese-administered POW camp. USS Seawolf, SS-197, was on her 15th patrol of the war, carrying Army personnel to Samar in preparation for the upcoming liberation of the Philippines. Seawolf exchanged radar recognition signals with the submarine USS Narwhal, SS-167, at 7:56 on the morning of 3 October off the island of Morotai, but was never heard from again. There are no Japanese records of attacks on submarines listed for the area and dates when Seawolf disappeared. Evidence suggests that the Seawolf may have been the victim of friendly fire, as the destroyer escort USS Richard M. Rowell, D-403, attacked and dropped depth charges on what the crew believed to be a Japanese submarine which had just sunk USS Shelton, D-407, not far from Morotai Island. However, the Japanese submarine in the area had been able to escape unscathed. On board the Seawolf when she was lost were 83 crew and an additional 17 Army passengers. The exact circumstances of their disappearance is unknown to this day. USS Triton, SS-201, was on her 6th patrol of the war near the Papua New Guinea area, when on 15 March 1943 the submarine reported that it had attacked a Japanese convoy, but was pursued by depth-charge dropping destroyers. The Triton was never heard from again after this last message. Japanese records indicate a series of depth charges made by the Japanese destroyers Samadare and Satsuki, and the submarine chasers CH-22 and CH-24 in the area where Triton was operating. The ships reported an oil slick and debris with English markings floating on the surface where the submarine had been previously sighted. The sub was reported as presumed lost by the Navy on 10 April 1943. 74 men were lost with the Triton. USS Trout, SS-202, topped off for fuel at Midway Island on 16 February 1944 and headed out towards the East China Sea for her 11th patrol of the war. The submarine was never seen nor heard from again. Japanese records examined post-war reveal that on 29 February 1944, a Japanese convoy of troop transports was attacked by an American submarine, right in the area Trout was assigned to operate. The submarine sank a troop ship and severely crippled a second transport before the Sashimo maneuvered to drop 19 depth charges. Debris and oil were then observed to float to the surface, where the charges were dropped, enough to convince the Japanese they had sunk the submarine. 81 crewmen were lost with Trout. USS Grampus, SS-207, was on her sixth patrol of the war-hunting Japanese convoys accompanied by USS Grayback, SS-208, in the waters near Vela Gulf on 5 March 1943. Exactly what happened to the submarine is a mystery, but she was never heard from again. From available information culled together after the war, it is most likely that Grampus was caught on the surface the night of 5 March 1943 and was sunk by gunfire from Japanese destroyers Mangumo and Murasame, passing through Blackett Strait, where the sub was supposed to be operating. The Japanese destroyers were later sunk in the Battle of Vela Gulf, so no discernible report was made describing the sinking of a submarine. However, an oil slick was reported in the Blackett Strait on 6 March by Japanese sources. Repeated attempts to contact the Grampus went unanswered, and the sub was presumed lost with all hands 22 March 1943. USS Grayback, SS-208, was on her way home from her 10th patrol of the war, which had seen the sub sink 4 cargo vessels and damage 2 more. On 26 February 1944, the submarine was spotted by a Nakajima B-5N which attacked. The pilot reported the submarine exploded and sank immediately, but anti-submarine boats were summoned to the area to depth charge the stricken vessel, and finally a huge oil slick developed on the surface indicating the demise of Grayback. The sub was reported as missing and presumed lost on 30 March 1944. The wreckage of the Grayback was discovered 50 miles south of Okinawa in 2019. Damage to the wreck indicates the sub was indeed struck by a large aerial bomb. USS Grayling, SS-209, was on her 8th patrol of the war patrolling near the approaches to Manila. The sub reported it had sunk a passenger cargo ship in the Talbot Strait on 27 August 1943. This was the final message received from the Grayling. Japanese records report a sighting of a submarine which freighter transport Hokkuen Maru may have rammed in Lingyan Gulf on 9 September. Although possible, researchers believe this was too far from where Grayling was assigned to operate. No additional information is available. There are no known Japanese reports of a submarine being sunk in the areas and time frame Grayling disappeared. Her scheduled report to chain of command on the 12th never occurred, and the sub was never seen or heard from again. The fate of the Grayling and her 76 crew remain a mystery as of today. USS Grenadier, SS-210, was on her 6th patrol of the war on 21 April 1943, running on the surface at dawn near the Strait of Malacca when the sub was spotted by a Japanese patrol plane. Although Grenadier dived quickly, it was not deep enough to avoid the plane's 2 bombs which rocked the submarine considerably. All power was lost, and the sub sank to the sea floor under 270 feet of water. The sub sat on the sea floor for 13 hours making repairs before finally making it back to the surface to get fresh air and clear smoke out of the submarine. It became clear the propulsion system of Grenadier was wrecked, and the sub was stranded in enemy waters. The crew attempted to rig a sail to move the sub closer to land, but unfortunately 2 Japanese boats appeared and soon took all of the sub's crew prisoner after Grenadier was abandoned. The submarine crew had to endure several years of brutal, sadistic abuse as captives of the Japanese, but out of 76 men taken prisoner when Grenadier sank, 4 men did not return home. The wreck of the submarine was rediscovered in 2020. USS Gudgeon, SS-211, set off for her 12th patrol of the war on 4 April 1944, stopping for fuel at Johnston Island before proceeding to the Northern Marianas Islands area. The sub was never heard from again, and the Navy reported the sub was presumed to be lost with all hands on 7 June 1944. A report from the Japanese stated on 18 April 1944 that 2 patrol planes attacked and possibly sunk an American submarine 166 miles southeast of Iwo Jima. USS Growler, SS-215, was on her 11th patrol of the war on 8 November 1944 when she attempted to attack a Japanese convoy. However, Three of the convoys escorts the famed destroyer Shigyur and escort ships Chiberi and CD-19, unleashed a flurry of depth charges which sank the submarine with all hands lost. USS Grunion, SS-216, was on her first patrol near Kiska, Alaska on 30 July 1942, reporting she had been engaged by enemy destroyers and there was heavy anti-submarine activity near the island. Grunion was never heard from again and never returned to port. The Navy reported the Grunion was presumed lost with all hands on 5 Oct 1942. However, after the war, Japanese records did not report sinking a submarine near Kiska when the submarine disappeared. The mystery of the Grunion was solved when the submarine's wreckage was found in the area she disappeared in 2006. It is believed the sub suffered a depth control malfunction after one of its own torpedoes circled back to strike the sub, which led to Grunion sinking and imploding.